Hello everyone, and welcome back to Water Moon Cards. This is Luna, and I'm following up on the last video I made. Thank you so much for the kind words on that one. Video titled The Problem with Buddhist Decks. I was a bit nervous to put that out because, critique can be funny, and it can be subjective, and whenever you have people potentially who don't see things the way that you do, then sometimes they can get offended. So yeah, I just appreciate your kind, supportive comments on that one. And of course, it's fine to not have, my same opinion about things. I definitely don't think I'm a definitive source when it comes to various topics. But just going from my own experience, it's nice to share kind of a problem and a solution to that problem. And I appreciate you all watching and being interested with that topic. So as I promised in that video, I was going to share a sample reading with the Margarete Petersen Tarot, which is the one that I use to talk to me about my spirituality. Again, I don't use it as part of my Buddhist path because tarot cards is not one of the assignments in that curriculum, and I do follow essentially a curriculum of teachings from my teacher. But I still find it helpful to use other tools like journaling and reading tarot for myself to investigate some of the things that come up and to try to help me understand which aspect of the Buddhist teachings I can apply in a particular situation, or to remind myself what the teachings say about various topics so that I can get back on track if I'm stuck or confused. And so that's what I wanted to demonstrate today. Now I'll first start out by sort of replying to a comment that was left on that video, or a request, asking me to kind of walk through this deck one by one and point out all the Buddhist symbols and what they all mean. And I'm not going to do that because I don't read tarot that way. I do not pre-assign meanings and a lot of definitive information onto cards, especially in a deck like this where you have a lot of abstract art. I don't like to lock down or lock in the meanings of the cards or the symbols or the colors or any aspect of them. I like to leave it open so that when I get into a reading, any card can almost mean anything, and therefore the message actually coalesces into something understandable. And I don't know if that makes any sense, but let's say, for example, that I pulled these cards and I asked a question. Like, what would the answer be? Well, I don't know because I don't know what the question is. But here you can see some parallels in shapes that show up. And so, for example, here we have a circle. It's kind of subtle, but it's in the background of this feathers card. And then we have a spiral here with a sort of a, vertical element in the middle, portal, whatever that shape reminds you of. It reminds me of several things. So we have a spiral here. And then we have another kind of a whirlpool-y spiral. It's not as defined as this one, but it's going around and around. And is it a circle? Is it a spiral? I don't know, but it has another vertical shape in the middle. So I might somehow draw some meaning from the blue in this card, the blue highlights here, the vertical shapes, the spirals, the circles, right? And then add on what I know about these cards from more traditional tarot associations if they felt relevant. If they didn't feel relevant, I would just look at the artwork and go with that for my answer. But if I got this as one of the cards, this as another of the cards, then I might have a different answer to that same question. I definitely would have a different answer to that same question because it's different cards. But I might look at different parallels. Like here on this Fool card, you have a warm tone and a cool tone around the edge of the circle, and that mimics the cool tone of the moon in the Trial card and the warm tone of the sun. So I might draw some parallel between the Fool and the 12, the Hanged Man or the Trial card, that I might not have seen otherwise if it didn't come up in this context with this question and these particular cards. So does that maybe make some sort of sense? Like everything is relative for me when I'm drawing cards. And yes, there are cards in this deck that have, something like, I'm just going to call it Western Asian imagery. I don't know who this figure is or who it might be intended to be. It looks vaguely Buddhist maybe, but it could also be, I don't know, Sumerian or something else. So I'm not going to claim to know everything. And yes, this deck does come with a booklet, and I tend not to read it because I like being more open-ended, and I'm not looking to be dictated to about how to use this deck. Now, if I got really, really stumped and, I drew some cards and they didn't make any sense to me and I went away and thought about it or let my mind free associate or just, do something else for a while and come back. That's often what I'll do when personal readings don't make sense. Then usually the answer will reveal itself. But if that didn't happen, sure, I might turn to that booklet and see if it had anything to reveal. And sometimes booklets do that for me. But that's how I tend to use any kind of guidebook for any tarot deck, is that I know enough about the tarot now and how the symbolism and the colors and the shapes work for me. And so I don't want you to tell me how to read the cards. I want to read them for myself. But like if I said I got really stuck, or if there was some element that was popping out to me and I didn't even know what it was, I might look in the booklet to see like if the artist tells you, what that is. Like for example, on this moon card, and I wanted to point out that some of the cards in the deck are a little bit less abstract. They're a little bit more definitive in what they're depicting. A lot of the majors are more like this one. But in this moon card, if I didn't know, for example, what the artist meant by this bound figure that's inside of this crystal, I might look, but I might not if it didn't feel relevant to the reading. I mentioned in my last video that this death card is very Buddhist to me. And I'll just say that's because one of the verbal analogies of death is that it's like stepping into the next room, that you don't really go anywhere. And so that this mirrored reflection of this figure sitting upright and then, gazing out into space, or maybe it's two planes of reality. There's this plane of reality up here, and then there's that plane of reality over there. It just reminds me of that view of what death is. This Empress card, again, is a little bit more definitive, and so you can look for actual symbols like mountains and fertile ground and fruit down here. And then this sort of Georgia O'Keeffe-esque, flower or whatever shape you think that might be. Kind of looks like a phonograph horn to me right in this very moment. But I wouldn't always interpret it that way. So again, it would depend on the reading. And then a lot of the cards are very abstract. And, it's like, okay, what would you draw from this? Sunrise, sunset? Like, that's the only definitive thing I can really see there. Clouds, maybe? The Six of Cups looks like ocean spray. But otherwise, it doesn't look like anything in particular. It's just shapes and colors. So me sitting here and going through the deck one by one and going, oh, well, this one's Buddhist because of this, and that one's Buddhist because of that. I don't know. I mean, maybe one day in a reading, this card might make me think about the ocean of samsara, and another day it might make me think about non-duality and the non-dual nature. I don't know. Again, it depends on the reading, the other cards, the question, all of that. What mood I'm in that day, what I've been thinking about, what's been on my mind. Those things are going to come into the reading because it's my reading, it's my mind, it's my interpretation. So that's what's going to show up. So yeah, I can't give you like definitive answers really, but I will give you a more clear example on a reading that I did for myself while I was in this most recent retreat. And just for background, retreat is meant, at least in our tradition, is meant to be an intensive incubator where you practice the practices and you uncover the things that you need to be working on for yourself. And everyone's going to be in a different, place in their life every time they go into retreat. And so it's not like go into retreat with a list of goals, right? You're just there to do the practice intensively and see what comes out of it. But what came out of it for me was a list of goals. What came out of it for me was a list of resolutions based on what I discovered about things that I do that are not helpful. And they're not helpful to me, and they're not helpful to a lot of the people around me. And so what can I do to then implement those discoveries in my life. And, this wasn't my example, but maybe a relatable example. Let's say someone is addicted to cigarettes, right? They're addicted to nicotine and tobacco. And so they go on retreat and they do not take any cigarettes or vapes or nicotine patches. They just go into retreat. And after about 48 to 72 hours of retreat, the craving subsides. The nicotine has gone out of their system. The receptors have calmed down, and their body is demanding the nicotine less. And so they don't actually feel in retreat with no cigarettes that they want a cigarette. And they're like, what a relief. I've quit smoking and I don't feel the urge to smoke. And that's wonderful. And they rejoice in that. And then they get out of retreat and they go back to their day-to-day life. And they suddenly start doing all the things that they used to do in conjunction with smoking, like having a beer with their friends, or having a nice dinner and wanting a smoke afterwards, or having a cigarette first thing in the morning when you wake up, or any other context, driving around. I know a lot of smokers who just like to have a cigarette in the car when they're driving. So then all of a sudden, right, the rubber meets the road, and you have to remember that you quit smoking in retreat and it was blissful and it was a relief and that you enjoyed it. And so how can you go back to that feeling at the same time that you're being functionally manipulated into craving again? And so it's the same thing in retreat for other kinds of situations, like maybe a person you find annoying and you want to work on your relationship with that person. And you can, in your own head, when they're not there bothering you. But then as soon as you get out of retreat and they're there being themselves, then you have to implement what you learned about your own attitude towards them, or, that kind of thing. So hopefully that makes sense. So I came out of retreat with these goals for myself to work on certain things. And my fear coming out of retreat was that I will relapse. I won't be able to keep the bargain with myself that I made on these are the things that I'd like to change. These are the things I'd like to improve. This is where I want to have a little bit more patience, kindness, generosity, compassion in my life, towards these kinds of circumstances or these kinds of people in my life. And, what a nice relief it was to kind of try to cultivate that in an isolated space. And then knowing that it's going to be more difficult once I get back out into the world and stressors come back, more to the forefront and want to push me back to the behaviors that I'm trying to quit. So that was essentially what my question was for this particular reading. And this is the cards that I got. And so in the Margarete Petersen Tarot, as you can see, some of the cards are renamed. So we have the Father of Cups, which would correspond to the King of Cups card. The Son of Feathers, which would correspond with the Knight of Swords. And then the Trial card, which would correspond with the Hanged Man. So my exact question for this reading was, how do I stay motivated and focused in applying the lessons from this retreat? And the first card, because of this central figure, and the central figure has these round things on their palms. And these, in a Buddhist context, would not be like stigmata or whatever. They would be eyeballs. And so this is a reference to a number of teaching stories, particularly the story of Avalokiteshvara, the Bodhisattva of compassion, and witnessing suffering as an act of compassion. So you can't fix the world. You can't fix life as a human being, as we all know. But you cannot turn away from it. You cannot turn away from difficulty. You can hold compassion. And so to me, this reading was saying, every single time that you get activated, that you get pushed by some stressor that is trying to make you turn away from these goals that you've set for yourself, just witness it with compassion for yourself And if there's another person involved in the situation, compassion for them, right? Recognize that they're suffering, that's why they're acting this way, that they don't realize maybe the impact they're having on you, etc., and just sit with it, just witness it, and don't push it away. Don't try to run away from it. Self-soothing is one of the things that I am trying to lean less into as a result of this retreat. So just sit with the uncomfortable situation, look at it, eventually deal with it, and don't run away. As you're doing that, the Son of Feathers card said to me, reflect on how this affects your mind. Reflect on how it feels in your body to sit with the uncomfortable thing and just witness it and not try to fix it and not trying to tell the other person what to do or whatever. Just sit with it and see how that impacts your mental state. And then keep doing that over and over. So the trial card, I love the word trial for the Hanged Man, first of all. I tend not to lean into this everything is hunky-dory and you just need to look at things from another angle kind of common interpretation of this, especially in the RWS tradition. I tend to view this card more as it could be punishment in a more negative light, or it could just be consequences. Sometimes consequences of things are good. Consequences aren't always negative. But results or consequences would be one of my typical keywords for the Hanged Man. And so I love trial for that reason, because it makes me think about trial and error, right? So in this reading, it's like, do this, see how it makes you feel, and then keep doing it. Like, don't just do it once, right? You're trying to retrain yourself. You're trying to retrain your habits, your conditioned responses to certain stimuli, certain people in your life, or certain situations that tend to set you off or make you want to run away from them, So that's, I'm in my late 40s now. That's a lifetime of conditioning that I've developed, and it's going to take a while to break that down and develop new habits around those same stimuli. So keep going, do it, and do it day and night, do it all the time in the sun and in the moon, or, whatever. There's other layers. There's a phoenix down here. There's this two-headed figure, or two figures, looking in opposite directions. You've got water on this side, fire on this side. So there's a lot of more symbolism in this card that I could read into the reading. But that was the gist of this reading. And it ties back into Buddhism in a strong way because, as my teacher has said, the Buddha was the first scientist, in his opinion. And the philosophy, there's a lot of debate, even among Buddhists, is like, is Buddhism a religion or is it a philosophy? And to me, the answer is yes. Because the philosophy side of it says, here are practical things that you can do to retrain yourself to be less miserable. And it all has to do with mental activity. And there's a lot of these specific mental exercises that you do in various kinds of meditative states, or just in thinking about your day. At the end of the day, we're encouraged to go back and review our day and see what came up and how we handled it and whether we feel like we were skillful in that or not. And it's that kind of trial and error and learning and being really honest with yourself about, what am I actually doing? What am I actually contributing to the situation around me? And is that having a positive or negative effect? And then course correcting when we figure out, oh, that wasn't the most helpful, kind, compassionate thing I could have done. Next time this comes up, let me try something different. And that's where the trial comes in. So putting yourself on trial, but in a kind, compassionate way, trying to really analyze what's working, what's not working, and to catch yourself when you get pulled away from this compassionate space. Catch yourself and recognize, well, what actually helps in this situation? It's not running away from this. It's confronting it and sitting with it. And, when you do get off track from this, being willing to sit with it thing and run away from it, Also see how that makes you feel in the long run, and is that helpful? And does that help you be less uptight or miserable or reactive? And I have experiences where I can look back and go, oh, this time it came up and I was compassionate and sat with it and did all the other things and I felt better, versus that other time it came up and I ran away and I self-soothed and I ignored it and I didn't feel better. So, I have that data now, that scientific data and that trial and error thing. And if I can just remind myself, this card here has a quill on it, so that makes, and it's upright like that, so it makes me think about writing in my journal, and kind of keeping a log, and again using that to kind of reinforce the behavior that I'm trying to develop. So that's really a good example, I think, of how this deck speaks to me about my practice, because it's reminding me of things that my teacher has said. It's reminding me things about that I've experienced in my meditative practices, and on and off the cushion, also applying those to my life. It's reminding me of things I've learned about myself in retreat. It's reminding me about things that I've read, these teaching stories and things in the sacred texts that we study. And it's bringing it all together and helping me remember the value of this path that I'm on and exactly how to apply it in the situation that I'm asking about. Does that make sense? So that's the kind of questions that I would ask. How do I apply this lesson? How do I continue doing this? Even if in the face of adversity, or what lesson from the teachings can I apply to this particular situation? That's how I use this deck, and it's been really great for me. And again, I would love to know, especially if you have this deck or other abstract art decks. Mims just has been posting a few videos, Tarot with Mims. She posted one on art decks, and she also posted one on surrealism decks. And I'm curious, if you feel like sharing either real examples or theoretical ones, if you don't want to get too personal, that's fine. But if you read with this type of deck that has abstract art or just art that's maybe not necessarily intentionally for this type of divination, but that seems to work for you, I'd love to hear about it. So thanks again for joining me. I hope this was clarifying, interesting, and see you next time. Take care.